Air. My name is James Langfield, and welcome once again to Talking Trash. Joined with me, as always, as this seems to be the case, is
Yeah, you dropped out again.
no, that's my bad. Sorry. So I just said we've got Andy and Claire. How are you guys doing tonight?
Fine. I'm alive.
Well, alive is as best as they want to be, I suppose. Um, we had a bit of a Q&A kind of session, and we answered some questions, and we gave points out on that. That's for us anymore because we just can't get people to can't get people to commit, and we're not getting people to come back to us every single week. So, with that in mind, it's more than likely going to be me, Claire, and Andy, professional wrestling, um, as it might be, and basically just having a chat about the world of professional wrestling. So, with
I
that
mean,
in mind,
for what it's worth, if we can get enough people at some point, there's no reason we couldn't do it as like a special again. But like, if it's not going to be consistent, it's difficult.
we need consistency there. So, with that in mind, we had a few questions. That's questions we're going to use, but we're not. We're going to just discuss those questions instead. So, with that in mind, the first question that we had off the top of the bat was in regards to Braun Strowman. WWE was looking at him as this unstoppable beast, this monster, now because of his injury, but he is being billed as one of the best big men in professional wrestling. Andy, we'll open it up to you. We'll come back around to me in the end, but we'll open it up to you. Who do you think is the best big man in professional wrestling?
See, I had a bit of difficulty with this. Now it's not a quiz format, it's fine. I can fudge my answer. Like, I was really torn between two. For me, the first one that immediately came to mind was Vader. Vader's always been the epitome of what a big man should be for me. Vader's incredible. His talent was unsurpassable. People complained about him being a wee bit stiff, but if you ever watch the matches that he had with guys like Terry Funk and people like that when he was originally coming up, you can see why he had that style. He expected people to be the same way with him as well. But as far as he goes for being a really athletic big man, Vader moved like a cruiserweight, even though he was like well over the 300-pound mark. He was incredible. He was talented. He had a hell of a lot of charisma. And when you put him against guys like Sting, you got classics. When you put him against guys like Mick Foley, you got like something like Mick Foley trying to get his nose broken for an insurance claim. But I mean, for what it's worth, you still got great matches out of Vader with just about anyone you put him against. But the other one for me that didn't immediately come up, but the more I thought about the question, the more I felt like you couldn't mention him. Like you had to mention him at the very least, rather, is Bam Bam Bigelow. Like I feel like Bam Bam Bigelow gets kind of forgotten about a lot because as far as what he did really goes, a lot of people remember him being a kind of jobber in the WWF. They remember him doing small stints at WCW. But if you really want to see the best that Bam Bam Bigelow had to offer, you've got to go and look at the ECW stuff in particular, like what he did when he was working with Taz, when he put him through when they put Taz through the staging and stuff. Like you got great matches out of Bam Bam when he was still able to do it when he before the end of his career when he was still moving around pretty well. Bam Bam was honestly one of the most criminally underrated talents that there's ever been. But as a big man, there are not many people that kind of stack up with the two of them. I know it's not everyone on the list, but for me, those are the two kind of definitive big men.
I agree with you on Vader. I was never a big Bam Bam fan myself, so yeah, Vader was one of the best in my opinion, man. What about you, Claire?
Mine's probably a bit cliche at the moment, but it's Big Show. I mean, he's just such a, by all accounts, lovely, lovely person. If you ever watch any of the backstage stuff, he's fantastic with kids. He gives all the talent such great advice. He's a real kind of, you know, he just has given to the company such a great person. And stuff is, you know, that. He's been doing that for the business. He's been turning to match the person he's going to then put over. He's been doing it for the younger talent, and he also had his own really good career before all that started happening. And I think he's just one of the best big men there ever was and will be.
No, I agree with you to a point about the Big Show. For me, yes, he is a fantastic big man, and yes, I mean, he's looking the best he's ever looked right now. But for me, what let the Big Show down was he never really had. It was a long run as a heel or a face. He was always flipping and flopping around. He had so many switches between heel, face. I mean, at one point he switched between a heel and a face at least twice in the same show. So he's never really had that consistency.
For what it's worth, you're not wrong about that, but there is a large element. What you have to remember is if you look at the Big Show through maybe about 95 or 6, when he was in the last of his kind of runs at WCW, through to maybe about mid-2000s, Big Show didn't turn at all. Big Show spent a large chunk of his career as a heel, and then when it came to a point where he was old enough that he wasn't going to be a main event talent, where he wasn't going to be at the top of the card, they used him as a utility guy. I think that speaks volumes about his versatility as well, though, because I know that it's difficult to know what Big Show you're going to get in any given night because of how they've done that, but he always manages to portray the right part, and he's got all of the bits there for it. Really, Big Show's been more let down by booking than his actual ability.
I see your point. I mean, for me, one of the best big men, and I mean, he's not getting the exposure just because of where he is, but Matt Morgan. Matt Morgan is a 7 foot tall guy. He doesn't have the frame or the massive size you expect from most big men, but he can go. He can wrestle well, and he's got the look that you know Vince would pretty much jizz over if he saw him in the street. So you know. It's one of those guys. Why is he not in the WWE? He's a very good wrestler, and he's not bad on the mic. He could do some mic work, but I like Matt Morgan. No, so he. What do you think of Matt Morgan, Andy?
I actually always really like Matt Morgan. Like, Matt Morgan happened to be a big centerpiece of TNA around the time that I went to see them live. It's not that he's not got talent. I think kind of the issue that let Matt Morgan down was always his charisma. The guy basically had the ability to work. He had the ability to run a good match, but whenever they put the mic in his hand, it always seemed like there was something kind of lacking.
He needs a bit more, like, not time. I mean, time to hone his mic skills. Definitely there. Kind of gone around the table with our big men. So the next question we had in mind was question 5-star matches. They come few and far between from him. So with that in mind, in your opinion, did deserve a 5-star match, but ultimately wasn't given it? We'll start with Claire.
Mine was the Charlotte and Sasha match. I'm really terrible memory-wise for exactly what show that was, but
It was Raw, the Falls Count Anywhere.
Falls Count Anywhere. Oh, there we go. Gohan has a great memory for things like that. I do not. But just the build to that match, the match itself, the way they were kind of doing things that women hadn't been doing so far, the finish where she put her through the kind of handrail and bent her back, that was just beautiful. And the whole match built up to that finish so well that I just thought, you know, it deserved 5 stars that it didn't get.
No, and it was one of the best matches for a women's division match. For that respect, any match that you can have there, and it certainly goes to show the WWE women do in the ring. and they are very good female wrestlers in WWE at the moment. With that being said, as I was saying, Andy, who do you think should have got a 5-star match but didn't?
For me, this was one where, honestly, I could have picked quite a few matches for this in the last couple of years. But for me, it really came down to one particular event that I struggled to pick a match. I was torn between two, but for me, it was the UK Championship, and it was either the main event, the title, the final match of the weekend, Pete Dunne and Tyler Bate, which was incredible, but also the match that Pete Dunne and Mark Andrews had was something else. I really did not expect what I got from that. It turned out to be something sort of this lovely hybrid between flippy shit and just punch him in the goddamn mouth. Like it was the perfect like blend of that sort of cruiserweight, I'm gonna flip a lot, here's some nice spot style, and Pete Dunne doing Pete Dunne. I mean, honestly, in terms of talents right now on the UK scene, the guys we've seen in the last while, I think Pete Dunne's got the ability to be something really particularly special. So is Tyler Bates. So is a few of the guys who were involved in that tournament. But honestly, that whole weekend, I know they gave him a bit more of a push than they gave some of the other guys involved and stuff. They gave him a bit more an opportunity to do stuff like after matches and storyline wise. But honestly, Pete Dunne came out as the shining star of that entire thing for that reason. I don't think he had a bad match across that whole weekend. And the fact that the main event only got 4.5 stars instead of 5 is a bit of a nitpick. I understand. But for me, that was 5, if not 6. But then again, it's the gospel according to Meltzer, not the gospel according to Bohan.
That's very true. I mean, I'm not massively up on where Meltzer gives, his ratings. I haven't looked up his ratings. I should have done so before I realised that I was going to be answering questions myself and not hosting. But for me, some of the best matches I've seen recently have involved Finn Balor. I love Finn Balor's work. I think he's one of the best. Finn Balor versus Samoa Joe. Oh no, sorry, not that one. Shinsuke Nakamura versus Samoa Joe, their final encounter in the steel cage. One of the best matches I've seen, one of the best uses of a cage I've ever seen. Shinsuke and Joe told a story that wasn't just a gimmick match, that was a match that came from them not having that full, clear-cut, defined, here's a winner, and then it kept on going and going and building and building and building until you needed that cage match. And they told that story beautifully, and it was a perfect way to see Joe get sent off, Shinsuke to keep his title for that little bit of time before he went off to Smack. What do you reckon for that one?
I totally agree with you there. Finn Balor, Fergal David, Prince David. I've seen him in ICW. I watched him before he went to WWE, and I just hoped that they would use him well, and I think they are. Obviously, the injury was a bit of a shame, but they've not kind of let that stop him. They've put him straight back in there. And I just love watching anything that he does because I genuinely don't think that boy can put out a bad match. I really don't.
Andy, what do you think of that?
And again, it's nitpicky, but for me, it was the fact that they took the belt off Shinsuke. I know they did it just so he could win in front of his home crowd and stuff, but it meant that that belt changed hands a couple of times in a relatively short period of time, and it didn't feel like the changes were meaningful. I understand that they had to get Joe a bit of heat in that feud. They had to kind of give him something to make him seem a bit more credible, but changing the belt at that point just felt like breaking a rein for the sake of it for me. That was my only complaint about that whole feud. Other than that, the whole thing was great. The matches that they had were fantastic. You got a great bit of back and forth between them. The guys had really good chemistry. And as far as Finn Balor, Fergal Devitt goes, I mean that's a man that I could stare at That's a man that I could stare at to no end. I have nothing, as Claire said, similarly, but love for Fergal Devitt. He's such an amazing talent. He's a guy that I kind of randomly found watching New Japan, and then we saw him at ICW, and then I realized like the extent of the guy. Like I feel like there's a whole audience of people out there who are just waiting to find out what Fergal Devitt is actually capable of, and I can't wait for the point where we're at the end of that and everyone knows what we know.
I think everyone's going to finally find out how good Fergal is. At the moment, he's kind of that face. Do you think we're going to see a heel Devitt anytime soon?
I really hope so. I mean, all of his best work in Japan was done as heel Devitt.
He's a brilliant heel. They should definitely do that. I don't really care when, just so long as it gets done at some point. Because right now I'm not too unhappy with the face. Devitt, I like him either way. You can pull both off, but I think definitely at some point they should bring in the heel.
I've got my fingers crossed for the club that we never got in Japan that involves both him and AJ. But, you know, that's dream booking. I know that WWE will probably find a way to fuck that up for me. But hey ho, I can live and dream.
So, given that I hold the trademark for Bullet Club, do you reckon when he does go heel and potentially has Gallows and Anderson, it will just be Balor Club?
It could possibly be, or they might just refer to it as the club, as they've been doing anyway, and have all four of those guys. I feel like it's a wasted opportunity if you don't. I feel like even at a push, if you really want to do this and you want to stick two fingers up to New Japan, which they clearly do based on the guys that they've like sort of brought over on contract in the last few years, what you really ought to do is take the four of them and find a way to get Shinsuke into the Bullet Club. I mean, I know it's not the Bullet Club, but it's what people always kind of wanted to some extent. They always looked at Chaos and wondered who would jump. For me, I always wanted to see Shinsuke back in Fergal and that kind of way, because the two of them had similar styles, charisma, and the ability to work really well together. I would love to see that five-man powerhouse of a faction just run over the place. But the problem is I don't want to encourage faction wars again because it's happened too many times.
No, I agree with you. Sometimes having a faction war just kind of dilutes of the matches that you see, and you've got multi-man tag matches every week. It doesn't mean anything at a point. Going on from the kind of multi-factions, it kind of reminded me of the Wyatt family. Obviously, they're kind of no more at the moment, and you've got Bray having a feud with Finn. Where do you see that kind of one going down the route?
I mean, I'm personally nothing but happy about that. I really hope they get a good program out of that because I love both of them. I think Fergal's getting a good run. Been used well. I don't think they've been used quite well at all. I mean, he occasionally gets pushed, and you're thinking, oh, they're going to do it, and this is going to be it, and then it just kind of gets taken away from us. So I think if they could give him a good run with Fergal, I would be happy to see that, and I really hope they do.
Again, similarly, I feel like it would really boost both guys' stock if you can get the both of them to work together for a long enough period of time. They've both got the ability, they've both got spooky gimmicks. What more do you want, really? I mean, I know that sounds kind of lame and hokey, but at the same time, both of them have really entertaining gimmicks that work really well in their own right. Bray Wyatt is an instant promo in a can, which was something that we really discovered when we were looking up one of those questions that we previously had. But I mean, as far as that goes, like Bray Wyatt, you can put him in a ring, give him a target, and he maybe never directly address that target, but the promo that he'll cut ultimately like seems to have a deep meaningful connection. Like when we were talking about promos about Bray Wyatt earlier, there was one that really stuck out for me where he talked about how he was going to destroy the world and remake it for the disenfranchised, the girl who thinks she's too ugly, the kid that gets bullied. There's something about that as a wrestling fan really spoke to me, and I imagine speaks to a large part of that crowd, because we get mocked for our hobby, we get made fun of, we're not usually the cool kids per se, so it's kind of really nice that you've got that element of that represented, and in the other half of that, you have got Fergal Devitt, who is just, I mean, there's the man exudes charisma. He's barely spoke since he came to the main roster, and yet every week you look out and you see a bunch of people with the dreads and the drapey arm things. Like his merch sales, you see everyone doing the big, like, sort of, I'm going to do the gymnast pose, you know, that I've just stuck my landing along with him to his theme. He's just, honestly, the boys gold if used correctly, and the both of them could really benefit for this. And the advantage of this really is that you've got two guys that neither comes out as a definite winner before the thing's even happened. This has all of the parts to be a great feud. I just hope they follow through on it and don't make an arse of it. That's really all I can hope for.
I echo both your sentiments there, Sonny. That we decided to use this evening. There's one that said that given the fact that any wrestling fan who's not in the business is effectively an armchair manager, an armchair booker, an armchair agent, an armchair writer. But with that being said, ever in a million who does not deserve a place in a wrestling company ever. Andy.
I mean, as far as this one goes, there's quite a few prominent examples. I'm not going to steal Claire's thunder because I know what she's going to say and who she's going to pick here because we already obviously pre-discussed this. For me, there's a good few examples. There's some people who should never have been allowed in a ring for multiple reasons. I mean, when you really want to look at that as a question, Hulk Hogan's a great example because the amount of guys who didn't get any opportunity because of the red and yellow marketing juggernaut that was Hogan politicking backstage is fucking numerous. You could pick hundreds. He said horrible racist things. Let's address the point. He shouldn't be allowed in the business because he's a shitty human being and he was a half-arsed talent as things go. People look back fondly with nostalgia at Hogan, but see if you ever really sit down and watch his body of work, it's nothing to write home about. There were guys around him at the same time, like Macho Man, who could have ultimately benefited from having the opportunity. There are guys around there around the mid card, like Bret Hart, who almost didn't get that opportunity until he shunted off to WCW. Like, he ultimately stifled the business in an era of late 70s, mid 80s AWA shenanigans. Like, if it hadn't been for Hogan, wrestling could have been where it is now much, much earlier. He ultimately didn't do anything to further the business as a whole. He only did shit that suited himself. And we were robbed of a Roddy Piper title run by virtue of the fact that Hogan wouldn't fuck off in the 80s. That, for me, is an unforgivable sin. That, honestly, like Mr. Perfect as well, like you can pick out so many guys that Hogan's very presence robbed of being the face of that company who were more than capable and never got the opportunity as a result. I mean, but outside of that, the one other one that I kind of discussed, it's a bit of a weird take on the question, but the other one for me, and this is going to elicit screams of blasphemy, but for me, it's Daniel Bryan. And this sounds weird because I really enjoyed his body of work again. I really enjoy Bryan's matches and everything. But looking at a guy that nice being in a position where his body is so fucked now, looking at him like sort of having seizures and stuff, like a lot of that made me really upset as a fan. A lot of that made me really like sort of sad about the fact that my enjoyment of that hobby and my kind of support of it may have in some small way contributed to that. It's really more a case with that one of I just don't want to see someone who by all accounts seems like a genuinely great human being fuck themselves up for the sake of entertainment like that. I know you can't really stop someone from doing what they love, but it'd be nice if we had a Daniel Bryan that wasn't, you know, in a position where he can now no longer wrestle and he's probably going to have to deal with certain side effects of concussions that have repeatedly happened for the rest of his life. In that respect, it's not that I don't appreciate his work or anything. It's just that a genuinely nice person's ended up with that, and that's not necessarily fair, you know?
I mean, I see where you're coming from. I'm a big Daniel Bryan fan. I loved what he did. My daughter, she's 7. I've shown her Daniel Bryan. She loves Daniel Bryan. Everybody gets behind his gimmick. It's oh yes, it's oh no. There is no getting around that. That man was gold for the company, and he put himself through an unimaginable amount of pain. An unimaginable amount in order for us to be happy, in order for us to be entertained by what he did. I'll give my answer in a minute. But seeing as we don't have a time scale, I think somebody needs to give us the next half an hour so we can let Claire rant on about who she thinks should never have been in the wrestling companies.
Well, when I was thinking about this question earlier today, 2 people kind of sprung to mind, and it was for kind of similar reasons. And they were Vince Russo and Dixie Carter. Now, Vince Russo, I think everyone knows why he should not have been anywhere near the business. A gimmick matched and title changed WCW into the ground. I mean, on a pole matches, Judy Bagwell in a forklift match. I mean, miscarriage angles. The man should just have never been anywhere near it. The reason I think of those 2 is because I think most people would generally say that what WWE lacks at the moment is competition. And realistically, Vince Russo and Dixie Carter are responsible, I would say, for ruining the 2 kind of biggest companies that could have continued to be rivals for the WWE. I know TNA isn't stopped, it's changed to Impact or whatever, but realistically it's a shadow of what it could have been, and it's not competition for the WWE, or at least I don't think it is, and I don't think they see it as. And I think Dixie Carter just couldn't get past wanting to own the company and wanting to run the company. She couldn't reach her hand out and ask for support from people. And I think that was her problem. She wanted to do it her way, but she didn't really know what she was doing. And that's what fucked the company over, basically. So that was why I picked the 2 of them. Same reasons, ran companies into the ground, and I think we're kind of worse off in the wrestling business because of it.
No, I agree with you. I mean, I've heard Russo a few times on other podcasts, and he's still as up his own ass as he ever was. He doesn't in WCW as being in any way, shape, or form wrong. He will not accept the fact that he ran that company into the ground. He's still as delusional as he ever was. But that being said, when he had somebody telling him and somebody having a filter for his bullshit, well, he wrote good matches, he wrote good storylines, but that was when somebody was filtering his bullshit. You take that filter away and you get WCW. Shit that he came up with towards the end of WCW's life. It's what ultimately caused that company to fail. But when he had a filter, he was not that bad. In terms of who I think should have never have been in the wrestling business, I'm going to say it's the great Khali for me. Yes, he was entertaining, and it just seemed that WWE signed an Indian wrestler wanted to reach out and get the Indian market. But every time he stepped in a ring, he looked like he was in pain. Every time he had a match, you never knew if that man in that ring was going to come out. I mean, Khali accidentally killed a man with that chop to the head. That he wasn't. He was there simply as a gimmick for the WWE, and for me, he should never have been in that position. He's never been allowed to have been in that position. He should have never been allowed in a WWE ring. Look comfortable. He just did not look like he's somebody who belonged in a ring, and for me, that's why he should never have been there.
I mean, as far as the Khali point goes, it is worth mentioning, obviously, the reason, as tragic and unfortunate as the whole event is, a large part of that guy dying was the doctors at that camp not recognising that he had a concussion. A large part of the guy dying was not down to Khali, it was down to the medical staff. I mean, I don't disagree with you about the rest of the points, but it is worth mentioning because it almost seems kind of harsh to say, you know, he accidentally killed someone. yeah, there was a horrible incident, but the death was probably preventable had the staff at the camp realised. That's why he was acquitted of it when it was brought forward as a criminal charge. Like, it was sort of dictated that it wasn't his fault in the true sense of the word. I just felt like that's worth kind of bringing up at that point as a counterpoint, because it is something that kind of, it's plagued them a wee bit. People always bring it up, but there is actually sort of enough evidence to state that it wasn't strictest sense of the word his fault.
No, I think you're quite on board. I mean, he's only doing what he can do, and if then the doctors don't pick up on that, doctors are not picking up on that. Going kind of on a sideway from doctors, about the your PG era, there's a distinct lack of any kind of massive physical violence. Chair shots to the head are completely outlawed. Do you think that Nigel McGuinness's campaign to get blood removed from professional wrestling is something that is to be admired, or do you think that blood still has a place within professional wrestling?
I personally think it still has a place. I can watch a hardcore match, like a proper hardcore match, but I am not a massive fan of them. There's a point where it goes too far, and there's stuff like light tubes and stuff like that that I don't think should be involved. That there are cases where obviously there have been accidents with stuff in the ring and it gets pretty dangerous. But I think that in some situations, blood adds a real kind of shock factor and amp up if used correctly. Now, if you think about kind of hardcore stuff and blood stuff in recent things, like the Dean Ambrose and Jericho match where Jericho went onto the thumbtacks, that was such a huge moment because you don't really see it anymore. You don't see that sort of stuff, so it had such an impact. I think it still has a place, but I think it has a place used sparingly.
See,
No,
when it
I
comes to
agree with you, Flair.
when it comes to Nigel McGuinness's campaign on blood, my one issue with that campaign on blood, like I don't think it's completely without merit, as Claire said. I can see a lot of that point. That's largely where I come from as someone who grew up watching wrestling in the 90s. Like I get what overuse of blood is though, because I've seen it and it's not pretty. But like when it comes to that, the big issue I always had with Nigel McGuinness's campaign against blood was it only started when Nigel unfortunately was stricken. You know, it only started when he was ill. It only started after he'd done a lot of that kind of work and propagated those kind of matches for years. It kind of feels like throwing a stone out a glass house at that point. Like as far as it goes, I understand that it's with the best intentions as someone who contracted a preventable disease, but at the same time, it's really difficult to have the moral high ground when you've actively participated in an awful lot of that.
No, I see your point.
To remove it completely, there's always going to be accidents and instances where you end up with hardware blood. And it just ruins a match. If you look at like the NXT where Joe was bleeding and the security wouldn't leave him, well, the medical staff just wouldn't leave him alone and just let it kind of bleed itself out. It just totally partially killed the match, apart from Joe kind of brought it back a bit, pushing them away and stuff like that. But it does sort of like jump in to close somebody up when they've been hard weight, then it just starts to kill matches and stuff. Accidents are going to happen, you know. It's a bit difficult to remove blood completely.
No, I agree with you. There's going to be points when you're going to get hard weight. Brock versus Taker in the two matches they had is a prime example. If you treated to him pushing the referee off. Now Nigel is in the WWE. He's an NXT announcer. Do you think he's going to try and get the ear of the higher? Do you think he's trying to get the ear of the higher ups to try and continue on to push his anti-blood agenda, or do you think he's going to be told, "This is how we do it. You don't have that much of a say. If we want to have blood in a match, we're going to have blood in a match"?
Being honest, Nigel McGuinness has always wanted to work for the WWE. I think Nigel McGuinness is probably going to work there and keep his head down and do his job. I don't really see the potential for him to start pushing on things when he knows, like you saw how grateful he was when they announced that he was getting to work with him, how he talked about how it was his dream. He's finally getting to live that dream in some sense, even if he can't actively compete anymore. for what it's worth, I don't think he's going to make any moves that ruffle any feathers or cause any hassle. I think he's just really grateful to be there. I think he's really grateful to finally have put that one to bed, because he worked at FCW for a bit and it didn't really work out for him. And he went, I think he's just grateful to finally be on, for want of a better word, one of the main products at this stage. I don't think he'll bother.
I kind of think that within the WWE, there's not a lot of kind of blood by choice going on. It's mostly, you know, accidents where it's hard weight or blood capsules. So I don't think he's got much of a reason to bring it up as an issue there. I kind of think along the similar lines to Bohan, I think he really wants to be there, and I think, you know, he's pretty fresh in the door. Maybe if he's there 5 years or so, it might be something he starts to do once he's had his foot in the door for a while, but I don't think it's going to be anything that happens anytime soon if he does it at all.
No, I like your points there. Going on from blood and wrestling.
Just before actually, for what it's worth, in relation to the Vince Russo point that was made earlier, there was something, it was part of the discussion that we actually had. So I'm going to let Claire ramble as a rebuttal, because she didn't really get the opportunity at the time, but it is worth doing at this stage. On you go.
No, me and Bohan did have quite a reasonably heated discussion about Vince Russo and Dixie Carter earlier on today. It went on for quite some time, and you made the point about him having somebody to rein him in, and I just strongly felt like you shouldn't need people to rein you in to be in the business. You should be able to do it on your own. You should be able to come up with ideas that are decent without somebody saying, this maybe isn't a good idea for a match, and throw out, you know, 100 bad ideas to your one good idea. Like, and that's what really annoys me about him. He worked at WWE and it only worked there and had decent ideas because there were people to rein him in, but you shouldn't need a team of people to tell you no and to rein you in. And that's what annoys me about him, and I brought this up earlier.
No. That if you don't have somebody, you shouldn't have to have somebody telling you, yes, this is a good idea, no, this isn't a good idea. You should have.
It is fucked that it would take another human being to turn around. Sorry, it went radio silence. It is fucked that it would take another human being to turn around and tell you, no, you probably shouldn't mock the fact that someone has a paralysed face because of a disability. That's kind of, she makes a fair point. It really shouldn't take someone to turn around and go, maybe bumping someone off the apron and then pretending they had a miscarriage is a bad way to write yourself out at a shitty angle that you built. Like, you're just going to hurt the people watching your product. You know, it never made sense to me that it took Jim Cornette, of all people, to stand up with a tennis racket and go, I'll beat the fuck out of you if you do.
No, he just isn't a good person at the end of the day. From just before we had a segue back into Vince Russo smashing again, which is enjoyable for anybody. We all love to smash Vince Russo. He's a flap. But going forward...
just such an easy target.
Oh god, yeah. He writes his own shit. It almost is like shooting fish in a barrel, having a go at Vince Russo. It's not hard anymore.
No, not at all.
But I was saying, the point I was going to go on to was that we blood and wrestling, like I said, it has its place. So I think it has its place. We all like to era. We all like to say that the Attitude Era is one of the best eras in professional wrestling. Now that the WWE is in a PG state and it's getting this juggernaut, it's a multimedia company, it has its own network, it sells billions upon billions of pounds of merch every single year. Do you think that we'll ever PG-13 or a stronger rating, or do you reckon we're stuck in a PG era for the next 10, 20, how many years it's going to be?
Well, I mean, you've just said it right there. They have the network, and it's something that I think a lot of fans do kind of, I guess, miss. And maybe it's nostalgia. Maybe if we got it, we'd be like, oh man, this is pish. Why did we ask for this? But I think a lot of people like that kind of harder style and those harder hardcore matches. They have the network. Why not please everyone? keep your Raw and your SmackDown and your telly people happy and have those PG and put on an hour-long hardcore match show on the network. You know, it's as simple as that. They don't need to, you know, change what they've got going on the telly, but they can give everyone what they want with the network. But that does also come with looking at the amount of content they're putting out. I mean, 3 hours for Raw, 2 hours for SmackDown, an hour for NXT, an hour for 205 Live. You're then going to have the British Championship stuff coming up. So they are putting out a lot of content, but it's still an option for them.
I mean, I think a large part of the problem is, though, when it comes to like you and I and some of the older fans, we do heavily romanticize the Attitude Era. If you really go back and watch it, on most cards there was maybe a good match. There at a push, like when you watch the classic episodes of Raw and shit, there's a couple of skits that go through it. There's a couple of nice promo segments, but the majority of the actual matches in there are trash. There are some truly terrible, terrible gimmick matches. There's some awful stuff scattered through it. We only remember fondly the best bits. I think that's kind of the thing. I think maybe 5 years we'll be saying the same thing. I don't think we necessarily need a rating change at this point, because it's got to the point where on a pay-per-view card, they pretty much just do what they want anyway. Now it's only on the network. I've noticed like a shift towards a much harder style anyway, like in terms of at least the network stuff. The actual quality of wrestling that we have now, I shudder to say this, and it would have been difficult for me to accept a few years ago, but the more the content I've watched, the more I realised that the quality of actual wrestling and quality of matches has gone up. Quality of bookings maybe stayed about the same or gone down a little, but the actual quality of the talent and the matches available has gone up. We don't necessarily need a harder rating per se. We just need to, what they really need to do at this point is focus in on the booking and fix the holes. Start worrying about how you're going to fix storylines that don't have an end. Stop putting feuds out that don't have a next logical point. Just if you're going to do something, go whole arse into it, finish it off, make sure you've got a plan going forward for where you're going. And if shit does go tits up, that happens sometimes, but make sure you at least commit to the storylines that you set up and make sure you finish them. Because honestly, the talent's there, the ability's there, they can work within the PG framework well enough at this stage. We don't need to amp the whole thing back up to the ridiculous level of the Attitude Era, because when you really look at that and what it entails, you start to talk about what was quite a, I don't know, at points misogynistic and borderline racist product at points, like the whole Las Barricas gang war thing. Like, I mean, especially when you realise that the Harris brothers are actually white supremacists, that gets very, very uncomfortable. But, I mean, as far as that whole thing goes, it's not necessary to ramp it up anymore, I don't feel. I think we're already at a nice happy medium. We just need to fix the actual quality of the product. Once you've done that, that's it.
Man, I have to agree with you. I mean, we've got to such a point now, coming back, anybody who's new to the business is going to grow up with a PG product. Anybody that's grown up with the business is growing up with a PG product, and it's one of the things that they're only going to know about in terms of what we grew up with if they go back and watch it on the network. So it's a kind of a generational thing, I think. We like our nostalgia, we like our history, we like to go back and say this was the best of times. But at the same time, to quote an author, it was the best of times, and sometimes it was the worst of times. There were some absolute dog shit matches. There was absolute dog shit wrestlers. It was at a time just before the Attitude Era hit that Vince McMahon thought that if you had a job, that was a gimmick and that was good enough to get you on TV. We had garbage men, we had repo men, we had mounties, we had police officers. If there was a job that you could do, you were on the WWE as that job, and it just made no sense. And so less in terms of gimmicks now. I mean, you've got your Bray Wyatt. A lot of the time, most wrestlers now, it's just a heightened version of themselves. It's themselves turned up to 11. There isn't really many
I mean, honestly though, if you want to talk about the Attitude Era, it's funny you use the word dog shit because we had literal dog shit at one point as well. You had the Rock Botman fucking Bulldog into dog shit and then refusing to pin him. I mean, it's just so funny that you used that word like 6 times in that set. I was just thinking, like, you know, dog shit is the ultimate appropriate descriptor of it because there was literal dog shit.
Pretty bad. I mean, almost all the points, and we've kind of gone around the horn and we've gone all over the place tonight. I think we've done a pretty good job. Next week or whenever we come back to this, when all 3 of us are available, what I'll do is I'll come up with a list. We'll give our top 10s and we'll count down and we'll go through that. I think that's something to do, or we could just shoot the breeze again. Entirely what takes our fancy, but I think we've wrapped up pretty well tonight. So unless you guys have got any other business, as it were.
No, I think that's good for tonight.
I think that seems like a logical point to end on.
No. So in that case, from myself, it's good night from me, Andy.
Bye.
Good night.
And then you've been listening to Talking Trash. We will see you again next time.